with that, I'd like to welcome Kevin.
Thank you. Well, I do still do research. I actually did a seminar this morning in Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Sciences on the research that I do. And I have a research collaborator. We run large-scale simulations of solar system evolution, and I actually run it in Auckland. So even though I still do research, but I'm now literally full-time in the entertainment industry. Actually, I want to talk about a couple of the earlier talks. I had some flashbacks during that. The good news is I'm not quite to the PTSD stage. But wow, things I hadn't thought of in years came flooding back. And the one thing I just can't go unchallenged. You think Purdue, Indiana is a tough rivalry. Crosstown is worse. And I didn't like seeing that SC stuff being a Bruin. As you know what they say? A Bruin's good forever. A Trojan's good. Yeah. That said, yes, I do work in the entertainment industry full time. And Hollywood's about imagination. The mantra of the screenwriter is keep the audience immersed in your dream, or nightmare, as the case may be. Now, so a lot of imagination in the industry and a lot of right brain stuff when we here generally think of ourselves as left brains. And I like to think of myself as having a good imagination, thinking back to some of the shows I've worked on. I can close my eyes and I can imagine myself in Section 5 of Global Dynamics in Eureka. I can imagine myself fighting along with the second mass, fighting skidders and mechs. I can imagine myself in my Viper cockpit shooting out of the launch tube of Galactica, but I never, ever imagined myself being here doing this talk. You see, I've never shared this before, but I've had a long-time fantasy. Not that kind. And I have to think that other people have shared this fantasy. I believe this because in Hollywood, production companies keep what are called MOP lists, most often pitched. And what it is so many people come up with the same exact idea at the same time. They all pitch these things at the same time, not ever having communicated. I personally consulted on the same movie 4 times last year with people who never communicated. So I have to think someone else shares this fantasy that I've had for many years. And that is, oh yeah? Well, one day I'm going to get famous. I'm going to be so famous that I'm going to be on a TV talk show. And when I'm on that talk show, I am going to say, don't buy this brand of car, don't fly this airline, and for crying out loud, Los Angeles, left lane, fast lane, right lane, slow lane. So now you pretty rapidly realize that 2 of those will get your rear end suit off, in LA probably 3. So you realize that you really can't do that. But I actually believed it to be more likely for me to get on a talk show than be here doing this talk. And for the record, when Cassini first went into orbit on Saturn, I have been on Good Morning America and the Today Show. You see, I didn't really believe I would ever be here because as an undergrad, I was not what you would call an academic terror. Now that I think about it, I think it depends on how you define academic terror. So I may have been, just not in a good way. But in my own defense, I have to admit that trying to double major in physics probably didn't help me any. But I also have to think that in inviting me here, there was the conversation, did you see his GPA? But he worked on Battlestar Galactica. GPA, Galactica. Yeah, okay. Now, I will admit, I did have over a 4.0. Now, the reason the older people and the students older people are laughing is because back then Purdue was on a 6-point scale. And before you start calculating ratios, let me save you some grief. The conversion is subtract 2. That's it. So yeah, I was not the academic terror. Yeah, and I was kind of disappointed because over the years, like that fantasy of being on a talk show, I've accumulated some really cool stories that are great reflections on this department that I've always wanted to share. And I thought there's no way in the world I will ever be able to come here and share these with you, but here I am. So, yay. So, I want to come back and share some of the stories of some of the classes I've taken and tell the department, hey, you're doing it right, and maybe pass on something to the next generation of students. So with that, you'll understand how important it was for me to be here today. In fact, I never use a script. I've done live TV on CNN without a script. I have something here because I'm actually a little nervous, believe it or not. So let me share with you some of the stories that from my career that have been a reflection on this department. Now, I'm actually going to go in reverse chronological order. On Cassini, on the Cassini spacecraft, I had the dual roles of investigation scientist and science planning engineer. Now, I started as a science planning engineer, and I heard that the role of ISS, because NASA loves their acronyms, came open. Now, that's the investigation scientist for the ISS instrument, that's Imaging Science Subsystem, not International Space Station. And the reason it came open is because the person got asked by the principal investigator on the instrument, who was believed to be hard to work with and for. And no one wanted the job. So I got this job that was reserved for someone way farther down their career because no one wanted to work with the Dragon Lady. I'll work with the Dragon Lady, and years later, we're still friends. So we got along very well. But since we're both speak your mind kind of people, I found out years later there were pools how long Grazier would last with Porco, and the most anyone gave me was 2 years. But I was in my first investigation scientist staff meeting. There are 12 instruments on the spacecraft. Each has an IS, plus we had a deputy, or project scientist. And we're at this meeting talking years in advance, because it takes years in advance, about how we're going to schedule observations for the Cassini spacecraft. Because the spacecraft has 12 instruments, and on that spacecraft, none of them are, well, a couple of them, but most don't articulate. In previous spacecraft, like Voyager, the optical remote sensing instruments, the cameras were on an arm that articulated. So as you passed by a planet or an object or a moon, you could track with that arm. We couldn't do that. So on Cassini, we had a spacecraft that was 6 tons in Earth's gravity that has to physically turn to point a camera at an object. I, right now, am spinning faster than Cassini does. Now you see part of our problem. So we're talking about science planning years in advance, and one of our more influential scientists, who is now principal investigator on our fairly major mission, says, well, why don't we just put in the begin time, end time, the orientation, and put it in, let the computer do the best solution. I said, can't do it. I still see him. By the way, I wasn't allowed to sit at the main table. I was off along the side because I was the new guy. I still see him turning, oh? And all eyes turn to the new guy. And it's like, this is a make or break moment because, the implication is this had better be exceptionally good. I said, no, because that best fit problem is what a computer scientist or mathematician would call an NP-complete problem, and those have a very nasty property that for even the fastest computer, they take to solve a sizable fraction of the age of the universe. And one scientist at the table goes, what? Saying that, yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. The name of that scientist was Joan Feynman, younger sister of Nobel laureate Richard P. I figured that with a Feynman in my corner, I was probably coming back to the same job the next day. But it just goes to show you that if for students who are here, in your theory of computation class, when you ask yourself, when am I ever going to use this? I've used it. Now, prior to that, I went to Purdue, went back to Detroit for a few years where I grew up and took a job for a few years writing video games, writing engine control software, and getting a second bachelor's because there's no way I was getting back into grad school. Did I mention that whole GPA thing from here? Yeah, okay. So I got a degree in physics, and that was actually way better than my undergrad. And so then I came back to Purdue for a master's in physics. And I got back in, yay, and thank heavens for a counseling position at Cary Quadrangle. That's what paid the bills. And so then I transferred to UCLA, and I got accepted by my advisor, brought me on, paid me for a NASA grant because I had a physics background and a computer background, especially from here. So yay, that, he brought me in because I had that background. And my dissertation, and I still publish in all these areas, was equal parts planetary science, numerical analysis, and computer science. So there is a computer aspect, and we actually are published in computer science journals. But when we were first doing this code, this orbit dynamics code, this large-scale simulation code, we would have research meetings every Friday. And our code was taking a long time to run. It was taking far longer than we thought it should. It was taking an hour and a half just for the initialization. And we would write on the board, my advisor and I and the other graduate students, the loops. It was a lot of nested loops. And we'd say, well, this is an order log n, or this is an order n squared, this is an order n squared. So this shouldn't be taking this long. This should be taking a minute or two, not an hour and a half. And eventually we figured out that because it was done extended precision and that was implemented in software, there's a factor of 50 to 80 depending on the machine, and that was where it all matched eventually in the end. But I had a student, another fellow student, pull me aside and said, when you and your advisors, when you and Newman, when you start going into, the rest of us just tune out because we don't understand a word you guys are saying. So, students, when you're sitting there in your analysis of algorithms class and you ask yourself, when am I ever going to use this? I have used it. Now, I'm actually going to go off script here a little bit because I want to share one story that happened to me as an undergrad. There was a professor here who I took for CS482, which was your first analysis of algorithms class. Her name is Fran Berman, who I just realized recently she was at the San Diego Supercomputer Center for quite a long time, and an ex-girlfriend of mine worked for her, and I didn't even realize that until just recently. But she was a brand new professor, very young, like 28 years old, very young, and she was teaching the bane of your undergraduate existence, the analysis of algorithms, CS482. Does that ring a bell? So we were all, it was a Tuesday-Thursday class, and Thursday was the Thursday before our Tuesday exam, and we were all, God, it's going to be horrible. She says, no, it's not going to be that bad. Just have a good lunch, bring a bottle of wine, take your exam, it'll be fine. Okay, fine. I'm not a big drinker. I drank maybe 5 beers when I was an undergrad here, because you know what? I was a computer science major. I may not have GPA, but I did spend a lot of time in the math science building. But I figured, she said it, so after we passes out the exam, any more questions? Yeah, Professor Berman, my question. Last Thursday, you said, bring a bottle of wine, enjoy the exam. Were you serious? And she said, I can still hear it, well, I really couldn't advocate anything against university policy. Why, did you? Well, no, but, and I pulled out a Budweiser, cracked it open and said, let's rock. And now she's like petrified. Oh my God, what have I done? I told them they could drink in the exam. And so I sit the Bud on, and I sit there, took my exam, and partway through she comes over, she says, could you at least hide this? Because you can see her job flashing in front of her eyes. And no one ever found out until now. And I think she's kind of safe in her career at this point, so I can share this story. But yes, I drank a beer in CS42 and got an A on that exam. So, but that's kind of, again, off script. A little further earlier in my career, I had been working for a software consulting firm. And back in the late 80s, there was a series of commercials. I just had to look it up. I forgot who these commercials were for Republic Airlines. And in those commercials, this gentleman was going about his business. The phone would ring, Johnson, it's your boss. Get to Omaha. But it's my birthday. Happy birthday. Get to Omaha. Do you anyone remember these commercials? Well, I literally, on the Monday after literally pulling my company's butt out of a big project for Ford the Friday prior, I got called into the VP's office Monday morning. Well, now we don't have any more work for you. So we have a proposition. We have a position open in Omaha. I said, you're telling me to get to Omaha? Yes, we are. I don't want to go to Omaha. You'll get 2 weeks. Goodbye. They dismissed me on the spot. Now, the economic times back then, they weren't what they are now, but they weren't very good at the same time. So here I am unemployed, going, what am I going to do now? Well, so I started interviewing. I interviewed for this one company, and they started asking me a little bit about my background, about my time here at Purdue. And they asked me back for a second interview. Cool. That means they like me. Well, the second interview was in a different building, in a different office. And I walk in, the double doors swing open, and there's this boardroom, this long wooden desk that I could have swore should have Donald Trump sitting at the end, yelling, you're fired. And all these very important gentlemen are sitting there looking very scowly and, oh, what is this? I mean, this can't, what's going on? So I sit down and they start interviewing me and they started asking me, have you had an analysis of algorithms class? Have you had this? Have you taken this? What do you know about? I finally stopped. I said, look, this is not a regular job interview. What is going on here? They said, well, there are a lot of programs that call themselves computer science when they are actually just computer programming. Now, we're based in Minneapolis, and since that has the whole Cray influence, the University of Minnesota has what we would consider a legitimate computer science program. Based on what you have just told us, we now know that Purdue does too, and we can recruit there. Because job interviews aren't enough pressure, I then find out that I am the touchstone of a typical Purdue graduate in their eyes. No pressure. So students, in your analysis of algorithms class, and your theory of computation, and your calculus classes, and your vector matrix, all that stuff, when you ask yourself, when will I ever use this? It might come in handy. and especially in a computer science department. Now, growing up, I was always sort of envious of my grandmother because she was born in the very late 1890s, and she quite literally saw humankind transform from horse and buggy to some very cherished Purdue alums walking on the moon. And I realized in preparing this that in the computational world, I have sort of witnessed similar. It was mentioned here earlier today that when I started here as an undergraduate, your programs were done on punch cards. Now, again, some of the people who were here years ago are saying yes. Some of the students are going, I have no idea what you are talking about. So you had these cards that literally a device would poke a hole and it could read your card. That was your program. And heaven help you if you were taking CS 380, which doesn't exist anymore, but that was the COBOL class. And you wouldn't bring a stack of cards, you would bring a box of cards for your CS 380. I still have flashbacks from Ralph's Rent-A-Truck database. All right, so, this is no exaggeration. A common topic of conversation among CS grads at the time was, when you close your eyes to go to sleep, do you hear chugga 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 chugga? And the answer was yes, yes. I honestly did close my eyes and hear that stupid card reader. If you lived in a really good residence hall, and I lived in Wiley, you had a punch card in your residence hall. But that had the unfortunate side effect that you would have to carry your cards over to the math science building. Now, I have a friend who's an accomplished martial artist. He's not very big, but he worked as a bouncer for years and only ever lost one fight, and that was when he was blindsided by a 2x4. That should put it in context when I tell you that he was walking along on a blustery winter day with his box of cards with his COBOL program, and the wind caught his box. And his cards went scattering. And to this day, he says that is the only time in his adult life he cried. Now, of course, times have changed. The dual CDC 6500, 6600, those machines back then, their main memory had about a quarter of the L2 cache in one of these. Yes, it's a 3GS, don't judge. So we really have seen horse and buggy to humans on the moon. In fact, I would say it's a little beyond that because sci-fi authors are pretty proud of the predictive nature of science fiction. They claim about all the things that were predicted by sci-fi. Now, I think part of that is that sci-fi authors do lousy statistics simply because there's so much sci-fi written. Somebody's going to be right. But at the same time, when you see the original Star Trek communicators they flip open, these iPhones got their butts totally kicked. I mean, have you ever seen Kirk get interrupted in a meeting by a text message or Spock playing Tetris? No. So technology has actually outpaced some of our sci-fi predictive elements. But some things are constant in this chaotic landscape we call computer science, and some things are attractors of stability. And this department, thank heavens, has remained influential doing cutting-edge research, and is producing some of the best graduates around. And then respected, given that I got into UCLA with the toughest advisor in our department, and actually got through it. There were 5 programs, 5 sub-majors in computer science when I was here. There are now 9. I'm a little sorry to see, given what my PhD is in, that the scientific programming went bye-bye, but it's kind of been subsumed by many of the other majors. What I majored in systems programming is still a major here, so I'm glad to see that. But it just shows that Purdue is responding to the needs of industry and the needs of their students, what they need to be successful out there in the world. A recent study on the influence and the respect that various graduates from the nation's colleges receive shows that Purdue was ranked in the top 2. Purdue's graduates are very highly respected. Now, in 2005, Steve Jobs gave a commencement speech at Stanford University, and with respect to the events in our lives, some of which don't seem to make sense at the time or seem to be a step backwards, he said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking back, so you have to trust that the dots are going to connect sometime in the future. Now, the dots from my education here, and those of my career, form the most amazing connected graph. That is something that I've never used until just now. But there's a saying among Hollywood writers that the difference between a screenplay and real life is that your screenplay has to make sense. Real life doesn't have to make sense. So although Hollywood loves stories of redemption, both on screen and in real life, I mean, hey, look at Robert Downey Jr. and Britney Spears, and we're still holding out hope for Lindsay Lohan. Still, in connecting the dots from my education to my career, who would have thought that student who had average grades, who struggled to get out of here, would have done some of the cool things that I've got to do? Who would have thought that I would have got to do a computational PhD, and in the process, write code that achieved a technical goal thought unattainable for 60 years, would write video games in assembly, write code that would help a $3 billion mission to Saturn make its day-to-day observations years in advance, would write code that would run under the hoods of vehicles made by both Ford and GM, would write code, most recently, that would help determine the fates of the second mass and a spacecraft called Prometheus. Don't judge. So in the final counting, thank you by being here and listening, fulfilling my fantasy for being able to share these stories with you, sharing the stories that I've really been wanting to get off my chest for 25 years. Thank you for the really nifty education. And if I had the opportunity to go back and do it all again, quick trip in the TARDIS, those of you who catch the reference, and give advice to my younger self, I think I would still choose to be an average student in this department than a star somewhere else. Thanks.